Good afternoon to everybody. Today we'll start block 4 of MEG-6 American Prose. I hope I am audible to all of you. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So American Prose. Hmm. American prose means you can say the beginning of American literature. How prose as a genre of literature developed and how Americans they responded to this particular genre and in what format actually this genre started to came to the light initially in American literature. All these things we are going to cover. First part of the block is revolutionary prose in America. So before revolution we can have also a look at the the period when there was the early prose we say it is not given in your syllabus. Actually the syllabus starts with the unit 1, that is revolutionary prose means when Americans they started uh, the revolution for independence. During that period, that is the revolution period we say, and before that you can also have some prose pieces during the religious dispute in America. There was religious contradictions as most of the Americans, those who belong to those 13 settlements, already I have introduced to you the 13 settlements at the beginning, how America got its population. The people from England, the Puritans, they have their own settlements in America, and these are the 13 settlements we say. And initially there were disputes related to Puritanism, and we find a lot of essays, a lot of prose pieces which were written mostly, which were published mostly in journals. Okay, there are certain writers like John Winthrop wrote about the history of New England, discussed a lot of religious foundations of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Another writer, Edward Winslow, he's also one of the first kind of writers. He wrote everything in his diary. So you can now come to the point that how literary prose, a piece of a kind of literary genre, they came into being through different formats: journal, press articles, diaries, letters. We'll discuss how now we came to know that John Winthrop wrote in different episodes which published in a journal. Okay, the history of New England, that was about the history of those 13 settlements, how America as a country, as a continent came into being. Okay, then Edward Winslow also wrote in his diary. Later on, we when the diary was published, we came to know about his writing. Okay, a model of Christian charity. Okay, it was also by John Winthrop. Another text. Um, this is the beginning of, you can say, the beginning of prose in America during the initial stage of Puritanism. during before the independence, you can say before the revolution starts, before the revolutionary ideology entered into the minds of the Americans. This is the first part. And the second part is the revolutionary approach. The revolutionary approach focus on the articles, the writings, particularly in prose, which were published or which were written during the revolution period, during the Americans, when they found that it is necessary that we must be given our freedom, we must be given our independence. So they fought against the British government, they fought against the rules of the Britishers, and that fighting came to an end in 1776, which we know when in 1776 they became America, means they became uh, United States of America, United Settlements of America. You can say those 13 settlements, they got united. That is why they call it United Settlements of America. And later the settlements came to be known as states. And you can say United States of America. This name they got after independence. But for independence, they got united, and there was a kind of revolution. So that is called the revolutionary period. The revolutionary period has witnessed a lot of authors writing prose pieces in formats of different. Um, they applied, they published in different kind of formats. So we'll discuss that. So the aim of this unit, revolutionary prose, is to outline the evolution of the evolution of the revolutionary mind, the revolutionary prose, the revolutionary mind. They the revolutionary attitude is very instrumental for the production of writings in shape of prose in America during the year leading to the American War of Independence in 1776. It will also focus on the context of American prose, the background, the scenario, the socio-political issues, the economy, the religion. All these things will be taken into account when we talk about context. So the context of American prose is also focused here. Its rise and development, how the American prose particularly rose as a genre, and how it was in the process of development, and analysis of key texts will also analyze. We will focus, we'll talk about, we'll discuss certain examples, certain lines from different texts, how they are, they have the intention, they have the objective of getting independence. Okay, so we can also relate this same scenario that also found in India during Indian War of Independence, when we were struggling to get independence from British Raj. In India also, after 1857. Okay, the growth of nationalism is a chapter in history, Indian history. You must have heard about this. The growth of nationalism in India also um, was very instrumental in producing kind of literature, nationalistic literature, you can say, literature of patriots. A lot of patriots, they started to write in order to influence the people, the population in India, so that they will come forward selflessly to participate in the freedom struggle. So that was the aim in India also. The same kind of situation we have witnessed in our history also. Okay, so this was the purpose of writing, and whatever prose pieces you will find in this chapter, it will focus particularly on the revolutionary mind of the Americans before they get independence. This is the period. It also focuses on the Declaration of Independence and also the formation of the American Constitution. American Constitution, after just after the independence, they received the independence from the British government. They also thought of having their own constitution. You know, American Constitution. So now come to the first part. What was the context of the revolutionary period? How was the socio-economical, or you can say socio-political, field at that time, and what the writers, the authors, they wrote about? So for that, you need to understand the scenario, the scene at that time, the situation prevailing in American settlements at that time. So when the revolutionary period started, resistance, opposition to the British rule in North America was already started. It started in 1760s. During 1760s, means from 61 to 51 to 60, we say 1760s. During the 60s we started to have a resistance, American resistance to British rule, British government. During that period we find that British government passed two acts one after another. One is the Sugar Act, and another act is the Stamp Act. These are two important factors which made the Britishers. The Britishers committed this mistake. They realized later on that because of this they lose America as one of their colonies. They lost the colony because Americans are not like Indians. Because American people that we say during those period, they are all British people. So they know the loopholes of British government. They know how to tackle with the Britishers. Those Indians do not know. They are simple. They go on different aspects of independence. They fought Indians fought in their own way. That is why we found that Indians have to suffer a lot for a very long period of time. But Britishers, means Americans, those are Britishers actually. They know everything about the British government. So when these two acts, Sugar Act and the Stamp Act, was passed in British government under British Parliament, that was um, not followed by, that was not obeyed by the Americans. Okay, the Sugar Act also forced them to pay more, and Stamp Act particularly uh, was uh, was on taxes. Okay, they have to pay a lot of tax on different kind of products, different kind of things that you used to buy. They perform in their settlement. They have to pay a huge amount of tax because of this Stamp Act. So that was opposed. The acts were opposed. Both of the acts. Okay. Uh, the Americans believed, they thought that before passing any law for them, it should be based on their consent, whether the taxes will be increased, whether this Sugar Act will be passed. So at least their consent should be taken. So without taking their consent, how can British government pass the rule, pass the law? So that was the point of opposition. They opposed because of this point, because they could not tolerate this kind of torture. They were British, they know everything. Okay, so they did not accept it very easily. They proved it to be very unconstitutional, as the acts were forcibly imposed without taking their prior consent, uh, or the consent of the taxpayer. those who are going to pay the tax, whether they are capable of paying the tax or not, whether they are able to bear the financial stress that will be imposed by the by such kind of laws, that should be surveyed, that should be analyzed before passing the law. But British government thought that, like any other colonies they have, they pass everything for India. Suppose you can take examples of India. For passing the law, they do not take the consent of Indian people. They simply pass the law, and Indians are bound to obey, bound to implement that law and to be governed by the law without any opposition. So they thought Britishers in America, in American settlement or in American colonies, they will also take it like that. But it was not happened. It did not happen that way. In 1766, the British Parliament was forced to repeal the Stamp Act. Okay, so you can imagine how the revolution was so strong in American settlements, that their opposition was so strong. British Parliament was forced to repeal the act, Stamp Act. But Britishers or British government was not to end the game like this. So what they did, they introduced another act, Declaratory Act. We call it Declaratory Act. So Declaratory Act means, by the nature of the act is like that: the sovereignty, the supremacy, the power of governing, that we say the sovereignty. Okay, the power to govern, the utmost power to govern is given to British Parliament. Okay, so they cannot, the Americans, the people of American settlements, they cannot demand sovereignty. Sovereignty is taken over by the British Parliament through this declaratory act. So the Americans who opposed the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, do you think they will remain silent after such kind of a great act that was passed in America? A very, you can say, disturbing act. It disturbed them the most, the Americans. Okay, so they, again there was oppositions. So you can see British government was befooled by this process of making acts after acts, for which they have to lose this colony. Okay, otherwise, if they could manage with repealing that Stamp Act, and without introducing any other act, if they could have managed to control the Americans and proceeded for some other years, they must have waited for some other years to introduce. They did not do that. In order to show their arrogance, their supremacy, their power, authority, they introduced another law. They thought that this time the Americans are bound to obey and they cannot go against it. That was the point of a revolution. And again, Americans opposed the concept of being a part of Britain. Okay, so now Americans people, they thought, why we will be governed by the British government? That thought came to their mind. They thought we can have our own government. Why we will be governed by the British government? So when this thought came to their mind, the revolution became more enraged. Okay, so they thought that they are different, though they have origin from Britain, but they are different. They are living in different areas, different places, which is not a part of British government or Britain. So why they will take away our sovereignty, and they will force us to pay a huge amount of taxes? So that was the revolution started. Then the 13 colonies, they got united. Okay, on this particular issue. So we will have our own government. Why we will be governed by the British Parliament? So they started to get united. The 13 settlements, when united, they are called United Settlements of America. Okay. On September 9, 1776, the Congress Party, the American Congress Party, renamed the settlements, the area, as United States of America. So we'll find that they realized that a sense of common identity, a common purpose. All the 13 settlements have the common identity because they come under the same territory, though they have different settlements. They are living in the same territory, and they have the same purpose. All of them want freedom. They want their own government, their own constitution, their own they want to be governed by themselves. Why British government will govern them, rule them? Both the British and the Americans, the colonized of these 13 settlements, were fed up with calling themselves British. So British people, when they come to um, America, they call the American people British because they have a British origin. Even any American, if ever goes to Britain, there also he is identified as a British. Okay, so they do not like, means the Britishers do not like to call the Americans British. First point. Second point, the Americans, those who hate the British, do not want that others should call them British. So that is why they were in search of a new identity. Okay, so all these events I am discussing, all these events get placed in their writing, in the format of writing. Later it became literature. We are about to study, we are studying all these things. But all these thoughts that were going on in the minds of Americans, the American authors at that time, get placed, published, and later became literature, part of literature. So this is the point of the loss of the search of identity. They were searching for a new name. They were searching for a new identity by which they can be separated from the British. Nobody will call them as British. Okay, Britishers are also, at that time British government was the most powerful government in the world. Okay, they have means innumerable settlements, colonies all over the world. They are the greatest colonizers. Okay, so they were the most powerful people in the world at that time. So they do not want that Americans, a part of their colony, should be called as British also. They do not like that. Okay, others will be called as British also. And Americans were not in a way to be called as British because they have their hatredness towards British, because British people are not very good, they are very bad. They are forcing them to do give a lot of taxes. They are forcing them to be under their colony, under their government, without taking their consent. They are introducing laws after laws. So that is why they were against the British, and that is why they were not in a way to be called as British. In newspaper, literature, socio-political discourse, the name of America became prominent. So British settlement, usually known before this, now was started to be seen on different literary magazines, journals, newspapers, in socio-political discourses, when there will be a discussion, a debate, or any kind of speech given by any leader. So instead of saying we are the British, they started to say Americans. Okay, this American word because America was not confined to that area only. They cannot say they are American because first they have their origin from Britain. The second part is the second thing is
ତ ପାଠ ପଢିବା ନାହିଁ ଫୁଲ କିରେ ଫୁଲିଯିବେ ନା ଲେଖୁଛି ଦେଖିଛ ହବ
so kindly take care of your mics. It's unnecessarily disturbing the whole class. So this is the point. Means when they started to rename their identity, they started to call themselves as Americans. I was talking that why they said they named them as American so late, as they were living in a completely new land. Okay, introduced by Columbus, later on named by Amerigo Vespucci. It was America. Everybody knew that. Why didn't they say from the beginning of their settlement they are as Americans? They could not say because they were living in a very limited area, very means you can say little area of America. America was a huge continent. Now we find South America and North America. You will find a lot of states, lot of countries uh, residing in those continents. So these 13 settlements only, they cannot say that they are Americans because actually they have British origin. They are better. They have to say they are British people instead of Americans because we find red Indians to be very ancient inhabitants of that particular new land. So that is why they felt it's not logical to say themselves as Americans. But now when the situation went worse, it became very worse kind of thing. British government was against their will and they do not want to be called as British, so they took the American term granted and they said we are Americans. Later it became the United Settlements of America, I said. So now they started to name them as Americans. The pen and the press had equal merit to that of the sword. That was a line by David Ramsay. Okay, David Ramsay, the historian, a historian of that time, in his book, The History of American Revolution. It was the book, The American Revolution, History of American Revolution. In that book, he had said that the pen and the press. Okay, we know the proverb, pen is mightier than sword. In that context, he said, pen and the press had equal merit to that of the sword. Means the sword kind of things, when we start fighting, we need a sword. Okay, you need a sword, a bow, and an arrow, or traditional way of weapons we know. Traditional weapons are these. And if you want to fight, you need all these things. But here, David Ramsay said that the pen was equally important at that time. The press had the equal contribution. If you take sword to be an instrument, a weapon to fight, so pen and press were also had equal merits in this regard. A defense of the New England Charters is an exemplary text in this context also. Another book by uh, Jeremiah Doomer, you can say. Jeremiah Doomer, another writer who wrote about, he wrote on this context, published in 1721, another very prominent book, A Defense of the New England Charters, which also reached a lot of people, and all the people in those 13 settlements were educated. They were very intelligent kind of people. They have British origin. They understand. They have a rich culture, you can say, a very ancient culture. They understand what literature is. They have already witnessed the flowering golden age of British literature. So that is why they are not like any other Africans or Indians or Australians. You cannot compare them with all these things. all these countries. All these countries were also under British colony, but this particular colony is different. So they used press the much so much, and they used pen as a sword or pen as a weapon to the best in this fighting with the British government. So that you find this book is also very instrumental. This book created the feeling, the manner, and the principles which produced the revolution. Okay, another important prose writer, you can say John Adam. John Adam has commented on this book, on the book of Dumer, the defense of the New England Charters, 1721. On this particular book, John Adam has given a comment, a very important comment, that this book created the feeling, the manner, and the principles which produced the American Revolution. Another or other important prominent writers of that period were Dickinson, John Dickinson, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson. These are important great American writers, those who are very instrumental in influencing the people through their writing, using their writing as a tool, using their power of thought. Okay, they started to influence the maximum people, those who all are educated, have greater knowledge of literature, society, politics. They know how to do politics. Okay, so political they are very strong, so they can have their own constitution and own government. So that is why they needed just to be, they needed to be, you can say, awakened. Somebody has to awaken them, and they played such kind of roles, awakening the people in those 13 settlements. Okay. So now we'll discuss about the next part. This is the part we found. The another important line by John Adam is also a dissertation on the canon and feudal law. This is another also important book by John Adams, a dissertation on the canon and feudal law. It focuses on the ignorance. It says that ignorance is the greatest cause of misery. Okay, this is about creating a nationalistic attitude in all the people, in the minds of the people living in those areas. A dissertation on the canon and feudal law. Okay, this book by John Adam was to prove that ignorance is the greatest cause of misery. John Dickinson, another writer, John Dickinson, in his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. This is another letter. I said that literature was produced, literature was found in different format. This is another format of letter. Later in Dickinson's letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania in 1760, it reached the largest audience. Okay, in this book appear the essay My Dear Countrymen. This is an essay, My Dear Countrymen, by Dickinson, John Dickinson, in his letters from farmer in Pennsylvania. It is, you can say, an collection of essays in which we find this particular famous essay, My Dear Countrymen, by Dickinson, John Dickinson. John Dickinson was a pamphleteer also, one who one who is fond of making pamphlets. So keep your mic muted so that no some surround sounds will be audible to the class, so everybody will be disturbed. All I request all of you, so keep your mics muted. So you see that Dickinson's attempt to aware the people through pamphlet make him a great pamphleteer. He was a great pamphleteer, and pamphlets was also another format of writing prose during that time. Okay, so you see how literature got consolidated in American context, in American society in the beginning. Okay, John Dickinson proved that the Americans are slaves to the British government. Through his books, Dickinson proved that Americans are slaves. So, slaves, you can understand the concept of slave that you understood from Huckleberry Finn, and different other texts are there in which slavery system has been highlighted. You can understand slaves. So when nobody asks about your liking and disliking and forcing you to accept something that you do not like is what? Suppose you are going to pay the tax. You earn 20 rupees a day, and if the government will say pay 30 rupees a day as tax, or 15 rupees as tax, so you cannot do that. So that is why the government has to consider the capability of its subjects, okay, the citizens, the people. The British government was in a sense of taking revenge, in a sense of exploiting everyone, uh, from his own people also. Americans are not other than the British. So now Dickinson proved in his book that they are slaves to the British government, to the British people. So why should they remain as slave? So that is very means very significant kind of influences over the people in those 13 settlements. So they pass the act without their consent. We are taxed without our consent. He said in that book, he said, we are taxed without our consent. We are therefore slaves. He wrote this line: we are taxed without our consent. We are therefore slaves. So if our consent will be taken, how much we are capable of paying, if it will be increased to some extent, that is okay. But instead of consulting us, instead of asking us, taking our consent, how can one impose? This is authoritarianism, you can say, a kind of government. This is not a constitutional, this is not democracy. If somebody will force you to accept something, irrespective of your interest, your ideology, your socio-economical status. So that
Sir,
is very important.
repeat that line, sir. Again,
Yes,
repeat that line. We are taking we
we
that
are taxed. We are taxed without our consent. We are therefore slaves. By John Dickinson. This is a line of John Dickinson. We are taxed without our consent. We are therefore slaves. Very simple line, nothing difficult. So, a summary view of the rights of America is another text by Thomas Jefferson, published in 1774. This is also another influential text before independence or during the revolutionary period. A summary view of the rights of America. So Americans have certain rights. So he has written all the rights required by the citizens of America at that time, and it was very crucial to influence the people, the minds of the Americans at that time. Society in every state is a blessing, is a very beautiful line. You can also write down this line by Thomas Paine. You must have heard of this name. Thomas Paine, in his Common Sense, in his book Common Sense, he has written this line: society in every state is a blessing. We cannot live without a society. So we need a society. The line goes like this: society in every state is a blessing, but government even in its best state, but government even its best state is but a necessary evil. Okay, society in every state is a blessing, but government even in its state, in its best state, is but a necessary evil. Okay, colon, in its worst state, in its worst state, an intolerable one. Means this statement is against the government. Government might be a very good government, you can say, a very good government, but you cannot compare government with society. Society is always a blessing, but government is not. Even in the best state of your government, suppose if you take the example of India. In India, you can say Delhi is a good state or the best state, or Maharashtra is a best state, or Gujarat is the best state of India. You can say, I don't know which state, you can take up any state you think is the best state of India. So in that state also, government is a necessary evil for the people, for the individuals, for the common man living there. So government is a necessary evil, even its best state. And if you talk about the worst state, the most worst, in its worst, the opposite, means the state which is not at all improved, developed, or never progressed, a very poor, poverty-stricken state like Odisha, or you can take up other Bihar, UP, such states in India. If you take that state, government is an intolerable one. You cannot tolerate the government. So whatever will the government do, so you will always suffer to tolerate. So government is always an evil. Government is not comparable with society. It's a very important statement by Thomas Paine in his Common Sense. Okay. So now come to the next part: American prose in the period of national consolidation. National consolidation means
କମିଛି ଦେ ସାଉଣ୍ଡ ବି କମିଥିଲା ସାରଙ୍କ ହାତ ଲାଗି ଚଲି ବି ଦେଇଥିଲେ
I doubt whether those who are present in the class they are listening to me or not. Means this kind of disturbances may be audible to them also. Okay. So American prose during the period of national consolidation means after the independence, after 76, when Americans got their independence, became free from the clutch of British government. At that particular period, they were trying to consolidate, consolidate their settlements, their states, their country. Okay, they are making it strong. Consolidate means to make something strong. They were consolidating their country. How to consolidate? If you have a strong country, what do you mean? You must have a good economy. You must have a good governing body. The rules for governing is very important. If the people are governed without any flaw in the rule, in the reign, then the people will feel, the people will feel equal, that we are governed by the same law. We Indians, we say we have the largest democracy. Here everybody is equal. It is said in the constitution. Actually, what is going on, that is different. But we say, so the rules must be very clear and transparent. All the individuals should be equal. So that kind of things if you make, then there will be no civil wars. You will find in America also there were many civil wars. Do you know what civil war is? Anyone can say? Any idea about a civil war? In British literature also, you confront a lot of civil wars. So civil wars are very historical concept. If you read history, if you read political science, if you read economics, even literature, everywhere you find the concept of civil war, and it is very very simple. Also, you must have the idea. Most of you have the idea of civil war. Can anyone explain in one line? Okay. Do you know what a civil war is? Yes or no? You know what a war is? A war means two groups of people when fight against each other for a certain region. We call it as war. You have the greatest example of Mahabharat, greatest war, world war. You can say the first world war in India, which we find in Mahabharat. You know what war is, and civil war means when we fight among ourselves within a country. If Indians start to fight against each other, that is a civil war. Okay, in terms of in India, we have a lot of examples, different kind of riots. We find the issue of Ram Mandir, Jama Masjid. These are can be mentioned as civil war. So people they go on fighting between themselves. So when Americans or the people of America they start on fighting themselves, or there is any kind of war between themselves, that is called a civil war. Sitala Yuddha was a cold war, you can say. Anyhow, the civil what is important, I am not going to that. So national consolidation was the period. The prose focus, sorry, this period focus the prose writing of the kind produced especially during the period from 1790 to 1820. This period, American prose in the period of national consolidation, this period, uh, this is the period from 1790 to 1820. And here also we find the formats like articles, criticism, and epistles. Okay. Um, Articles, you know, it can be published in newspapers, in magazines, in journals. Okay. Criticism became something very important here, which was not found earlier. Criticism. And another important thing, it was also present, epistles. Epistolary novel you must have heard. In novels division, in novels category, you must have heard epistolary novel. Anyone can say what do you mean by epistolary novel? Gothic novel, romantic novel, we say historical novel, realistic novel, epistolary novel. What is an epistolary novel? An epistolary novel means novels. Is there anyone who has any idea about this? Am I audible to you or not? Am I audible to you or not? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anyhow, somebody has responded. I thought I am going on speaking, and if I am not audible to, the participants, then it is quite meaningless. Anyway, epistles means letters. Epistolary novel means novels writing or written in the format of letters. You will find letters written. The chapters are letters. If you have read such kind of novels, uh, you can understand. Or you will find novels being written as letters. You will write one letter to your sister describing your situations, again another letter, again another letter. All the chapters will be letters. That kind of novel is called epistolary novel. Okay, you must come across, if you go through different texts of British literature or English literature, you will definitely come across an epistolary novel. Anyhow, so this epistle was also a format during this time. Some anticipated it to be a great flowering of American prose writing. Many of the Americans, they have the hope that this period will be a good period for prose writing, a great flowering period of prose writing. The so called American Renaissance, featuring transcendentalism thinkers, they also came towards this. Means Renaissance, found Renaissance, and transcendentalism that I said, it is also related to Renaissance, which came during this period. The formation and refraction, rectification, modification of the constitution is also done during this period. The constitution was in progress, how to prepare, what kind of laws to be included, something to be you know that it takes a long time when you prepare a constitution. In India also it took a lot of time, and a lot of people, they worked day and night for preparing this particular constitution. Okay, the largest country constitution with it's a very big constitution with a lot of acts, a lot of rules and sub rules. So they, in American constitution also, they took a lot of time, and this was the period through which the formation and the modifications of the constitution was done. And at that time we find two group of Americans: federalist, one portion of them were federalist, who supported the constitution, and another group, the anti-federalist, they did not support, they opposed the constitution. Anyhow, the federalist paper is another important text at that time. Okay, the federalist papers is another important text. Sir Ralph Waldo Emerson, you must have heard of this name. Sir Waldo Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, in 1852 wrote, from 1790 to 1820, there was no book, a speech, a conversation, or a thought in in the state. Emerson wrote in a book, in one of his articles, that from 1790 to 1820, during this period, there was no book, there was no speech, no conversation, no thought in the state. He considered the cultural blankness of the early republic with reference to New England. So, according to Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, that there was no literature. Means it was not actually correct, but to some extent it was correct. So, when we talk about literature, we talk about something beautiful, something imaginative, something dreamy, something. Uh, Literature is to be like this. But during this period, particularly from 1790, just after independence, up to 1820, so within this range of time, All the writings were about constitution, about independence, about people, how to support constitution. All these things, uh, kind of prose were written, and there was no piece of imagination, no work of imagination. So that is why Emerson said that during this period, there was a cultural blankness in the early Republic of America. The tradition of writing inaugurated in the mid 19th century into a hegemonic prominence as the writing of the American Renaissance. So, the kind of literature we study today, or what we say the best literatures of American literature, came up in the mid 19th century. Okay, up to 1820, in the initial, the beginning part of the 19th century, there were no literature according to Emerson. There was a cultural blankness. Okay, there were no imaginary, or there was no imagination, no perception, nothing to think over, nothing to criticize, only very, you can say, practical, very real kind of things, something patriotic, something to evoke the people, something to make the people aware. So all these kind of texts were being written and published. So no true literature got published during this period. Okay, and he said the writing actually, the tradition of writing in America started in the mid 19th century. Okay, after American Renaissance, he sidelined art that was not imaginative, that art is religious, moral, and ethical form of discourse. Okay, so art was not imaginative. So at that time, during this time, art was not at all imaginative. So if there is no imagination is art, that cannot be considered as art. Okay. So another point, running short of time. So he refused to see literature, or the literature's role as instrumental as influencing better citizenship of conscientious behavior. He said that independence was definitely achieved, but behavior, conscientious behavior, the character of a person, the behavior of a person, the psychology of a person is greatly influenced by literature, not this kind of writings. This kind of very means prose pieces, I said, they cannot change the behavior, they cannot change the temperament of a person. So you need, for better citizenship, we need literature, true literature. In post-revolutionary literature, art for art's sake was always subordinate to art for life's sake. So they focused on particularly art for art's sake, which is not, according to Emerson, which is not at all important. The important point is art should be for the sake of life. If there is a literature, piece of literature, the literature should be for the sake of life. It is very important. It is very important. Post-revolutionary literature was the product of historical formation dominated by republicanism. Okay, the governing ideology. It was dominated by this. Benjamin Franklin, Benjamin Ross, a singer of declaratory of independence, said, "Every young man is public property. Property. Their lives belong to the country." It was at that time that Emerson pointed out that the singer Benjamin Ross said that there was a line when declaring the independence of America. He sang during that time. It said like this: "Every young man is a public property." You can understand. Every young man is a public property, and their lives belong to the country. So, to some extent, this is true, but not to the whole. Okay, The Power of Sympathy by Hill Brown unusually designates as the first American novel. Okay, you can say this is the first American novel, The Power of Sympathy, published in 1789 by Hill Brown. Okay, so there are many other things that we could have discussed, but this is at the end of the time, and we have to stop. Another sir is calling me, so uh, if you have any question, you can ask. Otherwise, we'll stop.
Sir, what is the meaning of consolidation?
Consolidation means when you consolidate. Consolidate means what? Strengthen. Okay, making something strong. I said. So when a country is newly formed, we have to make it strong by all the means, making your own governing body, own military forces, own socio-cultural identity, your literature. If you have everything, your own language, if you have everything your own, then you are strong. America is the superpower. Why? So that is why they needed to consolidate, because the country was newly formed. Okay, so that is consolidation. Consolidation means to strengthen, to make
Sir,
something.
any questions from this novel we get? Or
No, this is not a novel actually. This is an analysis of the beginning of American prose in the history
right,
of
sir.
American literature.
Any questions, sir?
1 minute. Do you have MEG-8 also?
No, sir.
So I have
No.
already started the class. Okay,
Okay.
questions can be on every unit. You can expect a question.
Right, sir.
Okay, how did prose developed in the revolutionary period? Can be a question.
Yes, sir.
How the American literature they responded to writing prose during the post-independence period. That can be a piece of that can be a question also. So you can, all the units have different aspects of discussion. You can expect all the units to be a question. Okay, so you have to
Right,
understand
sir.
the basic concepts that that is discussed in the chapters, in all the chapters, all the units. And you can answer any question.
Yes,
So
sir.
keep
Thank you.
American history in your mind at least.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So should I go for MEG 8?
Yes, yes, definitely. I have started the class. You
Yes, sir.
can join.